This is Kathleen Nicole O'Neill with House of Cartomancy, and for one of my first videos on this channel, I wanted to talk about a brand new tarot deck that I recently purchased and that I am very excited about working with, journaling with, doing readings with very soon. And that is the Animal Wisdom Tarot shown here. And it is written and created by Brunke, and the illustrations are by Liola. And this deck is published by Seco Books, which is not a tarot publisher that I was previously as familiar with as some of the other big names in tarot and oracle card and Lenormand card publishing. However, it seems like they've done a few card decks, not as many as some publishers, but it is something that apparently they have done to some extent. And I want to talk a little bit about this deck and what drew me to this deck, what caused me to choose this deck, and then I'm going to show you a little bit more about the packaging. I'm going to show you the book that comes with the deck, and then I'm going to show you some of the cards. I'm not a big believer in my personal reviews in showing every single card in a review, because I'm a big believer that whenever it comes to tarot decks and oracle decks and things of that nature, whenever you open the deck for the first time, there should be a few surprises. There should be some cards that you haven't seen or heard about before that surprise you a little bit and get you excited in a new way that maybe you weren't expecting. But I am going to show you some of the cards. I'm going to talk a little bit about the structure of the deck and the ideas that are behind the deck. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the cards that spoke to me, that made me want to buy the deck, and that I found to be very interesting and thought-provoking for me personally whenever I first looked at the deck. I'm going to talk a little bit about what really interested me in this deck, as opposed to some of the other tarot decks or oracle decks or other cartomancy type decks that are out there on the market. First of all, I was interested in a deck that would allow me to work with animal and nature type energies. And as you may be aware, there's a lot of tarot and oracle decks that are out there on the market that have animal themes, that have nature themes. And recently, in terms of my spiritual path, animal and nature energies are something that I've become more interested in. I've become more interested in working with animal spirit guides and things of that nature. I recently moved temporarily back to the greater northern Florida, central Florida area, which is not very far from where I grew up, although it's not exactly where I grew up. I'm in Sarasota, and I grew up in the northwest Florida panhandle in a very, very rural community called Baker that's about an hour away from Pensacola or Fort Walton Beach or Destin, if you're familiar with those areas at all. But the area of Florida that I live in now, it's not as rural as where I grew up, but some of the wildlife and flora and fauna is somewhat similar to what I grew up with. We have a lot of lizards, and I absolutely love lizards. And so one of the big things for me recently since moving here is kind of rediscovering my love for wild lizards and getting excited when I see them and noticing the different kinds and learning about the different kinds and seeing the different colors they are and things like that. And we have squirrels, we have a lot of deer, we have, a lot of, wildlife in this part of Florida. And so it's kind of brought back memories of my childhood, because previously when I lived in San Francisco and when I lived in Washington, D.C. prior to that, I was in a very urban setting, and so I didn't see as much wildlife. I didn't see as much of nature just in my everyday life as I do now and as I did growing up. And so recently I've been more interested in, learning about nature, reconnecting with nature and animals, and all that sort of thing. And when I looked into a lot of the decks that were out there on the market, some of them I, found to be very, beautiful decks, but they didn't feature all of the animals that I personally have a connection to. And as I get to the cards that feature those animals that I feel the most personal connection with, I'll talk a little bit about those. But some decks didn't have any, or some only had a few, and so I wanted a deck that had as many of those animals as possible, and preferably all of those animals. And this is the only deck I've found that had pretty much all the animals in it that I connect to spiritually and on a personal level. And so that's one thing that made me excited about the deck. Another thing that I really loved about this deck, and I will show more of this to you as the video progresses, is the artwork from Liola. A lot of the animal decks that I've looked at, they tend to go to one of two extremes. Either they have animals that look very natural in a sense, and they're paintings, but they almost sort of look like photographs in the sense that it will show the animal in a natural environment. But as far as, for me personally, really bringing out some of the mythopoetic and spiritual elements of that animal energy, I don't see that maybe as much. And other decks seem like they go to an extreme where they show an animal in a sense that, is very beautiful, is very mythical, is very creative, but it doesn't really capture for me sort of the natural energy of that animal in its natural habitat, and what that animal is really like in actuality. And what I liked about the artwork on this deck is it seemed to have the best of both worlds. It showed the animals in somewhat of a natural environment, and it brought out a lot of the natural type characteristics that make these animals so interesting and beautiful and compelling. And at the same time, it also kind of had a whimsical side to the artwork, and I think you'll see that as I go through some of the cards. The colors were very bright. It reminded me somewhat of what you might see in a children's book to some extent, and the artwork itself is very beautiful, and I could definitely see a lot of these images as the sort of thing you would want to decorate a home with, or decorate a classroom with, or decorate an office with, because the artwork itself is just that really beautiful marriage of what's mythical and mystical and whimsical, and also what is natural and what is beautiful and powerful about these animals in a more natural context. Another thing I like about this deck is that a lot of animal decks, they really kind of look at animals of one particular type, or they look at animals from one type of environment. So you see some decks that are focused just on birds, or you see some decks that are focused just on cats, or just on dogs, or some that are focused just on jungle animals, or just on Australian animals, or just particular types of animals. And what I loved about this deck is it had all different types of mammals. It had sea animals, it had fish, it had birds, it had mammals, it had domestic animals, it had amphibians, it had reptiles, it had insects, and it had animals from all different kinds of habitats in all different parts of the world. And as someone that loves all different types of animals and all different types of natural settings, I found that to be a big draw for this deck, as opposed to a deck that's just a forest deck, or just a cat deck, or just a bird deck, or something of that nature. I really liked the diversity of the animals shown, and I really liked the diversity of the habitat shown. One thing too that appealed to me about this deck is some tarot decks you look at, it concerns me because it seems like they have a theme, whether it's animals or fairies or angels or whatever else. And sometimes it seems like they just went through the 78 cards and they just, slap an animal on there, or slap an angel on there, or whatever, but they don't really connect the choice of the different images and the different concepts for the cards to the original meaning that you find for these different cards in the traditional tarot structure. And I feel like if you're not going to make those connections, you might as well do an oracle deck. Oracle decks are wonderful, they're beautiful, they can be very spiritual, they can be great tools for divination, they can be great tools for journaling and meditation. And I really believe that if you're going to go with that traditional tarot structure, that you might as well, if you're not going to go with that traditional tarot structure rather, you might as well go ahead and, just do an oracle deck. And what really impressed me about what Don Brunke and Liola seem to have done with this deck is they take the animal concepts and they really connect it with the meanings that are traditionally imbued in those 78 cards of the tarot. And as I go through this deck and I go through the book, I'll show you more what I mean by that, and I'll help you to see what helped me to find, a lot of beauty and inspiration in this deck where that's concerned. The packaging for this deck is really amazing. A lot of tarot card decks I've found, especially compared to oracle card decks, sometimes the packaging is just not as good. And this is a nice sturdy box. See, it opens up. It's a beautiful box, both the front and both sides, as well as the back. It has pictures of some of the cards, and so it kind of gives you an idea, just a little taste of what you can expect. And on the back, it says the Animal Wisdom Tarot blends traditional tarot symbolism with animal wisdom. This box contains a complete deck of 78 specially designed tarot cards and an accompanying 96-page book which explains how to use the cards and their meanings. Using tarot cards is a time-honored way to recognize patterns of our past, explore alternatives in our present, and predict potential outcomes in our future. Every card in the deck features a unique animal drawing that merges classic tarot meaning with animal teaching and guidance. And the deck is about $20, and you can find it on Amazon. You can also order it on Don Brunke's website. And as you can see, the packaging is just very beautiful, very sturdy. I definitely plan to store my cards in this packaging. It's not something that I feel like I have to buy another tarot bag or something like that to store it in. You certainly can if you like, but I like the idea of storing it in this sturdy packaging because it's just really, really, nice, beautiful, colorful packaging. And immediately I see it and I know what's going to be in here. You can store it on a bookshelf, you can store it any number of places. Just really beautiful, solid storage. And first, I'm going to take out the book. And it is a beautiful book. It's a well-made book. It's all in color. And that's another thing that was kind of special about the packaging for this deck. And you see here, it has this, What is Tarot, and the Animal Wisdom Tarot, just kind of an introduction of sorts here. Here, it talks a little bit about the major arcana in this deck, as well as the minor arcana in this deck. And it talks about the four suits, and what she has done with the four suits in this deck I think is very interesting, and I think it deserves a little bit of discussion. She doesn't have the traditional four suits of wands, cups, swords, pentacles that you would find in, say, the Rider-Waite-Smith system or something like that. Instead of wands, she has the suit of branches. And instead of cups, she has the suit of shells. Instead of pentacles, she has the suit of fossils. And instead of swords, she has the suit of feathers. And it talks here about what she's done here and how those line up with the four more traditional types of suits that you find in the Rider-Waite-Smith system and in a lot of other more traditional tarot decks. And I really like what she's done here because she's really taken that traditional tarot symbolism and yet she has done something with it that's unique and that really carries forth this whole theme of animals and nature, and that's very creative and interesting. The other change that the author and the illustrator here have made to this particular deck that I really like is in reference to the court cards. Instead of pages and knights and queens and kings, what she has is, for pages, is seers. For knights, she has seekers. For queens, she has nurturers. And for kings, she has guardians. And here on this page with the court cards, it talks about the changes to that and why she chose to make those choices and what's the same and what's different compared to more traditional tarot type systems. Here's a quick guide to numbers where she talks about the aces, the twos, the threes, the fours, the fives, the sixes, the sevens, the eights, the nines, and the tens in tarot, and what they mean in terms of this deck and the symbolism and significance of the numbers. There is how to read tarot cards, the basics of that. There are a few tarot spreads. She has a very classic past, present, future spread here, as well as one called Bear Paws, which is inspired by the Brown Bear Guardian of Fossils card in this deck, which of course features a brown bear. She has the Honeybee Lovers spread, which is inspired by Honeybee, the Heart Awakener, which is traditionally the Lovers card. And so it talks about that spread. And then she also has a very classic Celtic cross spread and explains the significance behind the different cards and their positions in that spread as well. And she has this sample reading here where she shows a sample reading with cards from this deck and how she would interpret them in the context of this sample reading, which I really like because it shows how this works in practice with an actual sample reading, and it has the beautiful cards and their images laid out in full color here. And then, of course, we get to the cards, and as you can see here, every page has a beautiful, almost full-size, full-color reproduction of the card. It has the card name, it talks about the meaning behind the card, and of course it has that for each of the 78 separate cards in this deck. And they are all in colors. It has, as you can see, the name. So for the Fool, we have Coyote Trickster. The number of the card, we have here card 0. The traditional name, the Fool, and some keynote words: originality, humor, unconventional wisdom, and freedom in this case. And then we have some text about the divinatory meaning of the card, and then a little message at the bottom for each card. And for this card, it's take a chance, trust yourself. So it's just really a beautiful book. Very helpful, all the standard stuff you would find. It's not as detailed as some books, but everything's there, and it really has everything that I think you would want in a tarot book of this nature that comes with a deck like this. So I wanted to show you some of the cards in the deck, which are obviously the best part, the reason you get the deck. Here are the backs of the cards in this deck, and they feature the Coyote, who is a trickster, and who is the 0 card, the Fool, in this deck, and they're beautiful backs. The cardstock quality is very good. I believe they're laminated, they're easy to shuffle. It's just a really good quality card. You can see here about the size they are, about the size of a standard, regular size tarot deck. So they're not huge cards, they're not small cards, they're about a standard sized card. And the very first card in the deck is the Fool. And I love what she's done because her Fool is the Coyote, who's a trickster. And if you know anything about animals in folklore or mythology, in a lot of Native American mythology and religion, in a lot of traditional African stories too, if I'm not mistaken, you find this notion in a lot of world religious thought and folklore and mythology of the coyote figure as a type of trickster, and that really meshes beautifully with the understanding of the fool in the traditional tarot system. And I think that's just a prime example of the thought and the deep understanding of the tarot, as well as the deep understanding of animal biology and animals in human culture and human religion and in human spirituality that the author and the artist bring to this deck. The Raven card is the magician in this deck, which again, if you know anything about ravens in a lot of Celtic mythology, in a lot of pagan religious and spiritual thought, you see this notion of the raven as kind of this shape-shifting magician type figure, and that really meshes with the traditional understanding of the magician in tarot. And I absolutely, just love what Don Brunke, I believe I'm pronouncing her name correctly, and Ola Liola have done with their wedding of different archetypes from tarot with different animal figures and archetypes. I wanted to make sure that I had a cat in my deck. I've never had a cat, but I have known a number of cats. I've had a lot of friends over the years that have had cats, and I've gotten to know some of their cats and learned about the fascinating and beautiful creatures they are. And the high priestess in this deck is a cat, and it's the keeper of secrets, which I absolutely loved and again found very appropriate for the feminine energy and the feminine archetypes that we oftentimes associate with cats, as well as the energy and the mythos of the high priestess in tarot. I loved that the empress in this deck is a cow, and she's called the earth mother in this deck. And when you think about a cow, you think about fertility, you think about the giving of milk, the provision of meat, you think about this beautiful, gentle, maternal animal. And when you think about the Empress in tarot, you think of a motherly figure, you think of fertility, you think of creativity, you think of giving, you think of nurturing. In a lot of decks, the Empress is shown as a pregnant woman, even. And you think of the mother aspect of the triple goddess of the maiden, mother, and crone. And so what better way to represent that than with this beautiful cow? I had to absolutely make sure that in any animal deck I had, we had a ram or a lamb or a sheep or something of that nature. Anyone knows me knows that lambs, rams, sheep, goats are absolutely among my favorite animals in the world. I have a bunch of stuffed sheep. They're one of my spirit animals in a sense, and ever since childhood, I've always loved them. I've always loved lambs and sheep and rams, and I've always collected them. And the Emperor in this deck is a ram, and he's the Earth Father. And I love how he looks both very gentle and very nurturing, and at the same time he also looks very proud and strong and masculine. And I like how in this deck it weds both of those aspects together. In some decks, I feel like the Emperor card, he almost comes across to me sometimes as too authoritarian of a force, as too patriarchal of a force. And I like how in this deck as the ram, he's strong, he's a leader, he's masculine, but at the same time, he's also nurturing and gentle like a sheep. And so I really loved this. The Hierophant is probably the most important card to me in all of tarot. And it's a card that is always important to me in any deck. I feel like one of the main cards that's important to me to see deck creators and illustrators really get right is the Hierophant. I'm pursuing a career in academia as an academic philosopher, and my undergraduate background is in religion as well as political science and history. And so I think of the Hierophant as an educator. I think of him as a teacher, in addition to thinking of him as a priest or a monk or a priestess or a witch. I think of him as that, religious figure, that religious teacher, and also as an academic figure and an academic sort of teacher. And my parents were both K through 12 teachers. It's a card that I resonate with on a lot of levels, spiritual, professional, personal, and it's important for me to see the Hierophant gotten right in decks. And I really find it interesting and thought-provoking what the artist and illustrator have done with the Hierophant in this deck. In this deck, the Hierophant is a bull, and he is the keeper of sacred tradition. And you see he has a ring of keys around his neck. You see he has a symbol on his forehead, and I'm not quite sure what that symbol is, but it's something I want to read more about in the book and maybe do some research and journaling with. And when you think about our great religious traditions, whether you think about Christianity or Judaism or Islam or Buddhism or Hinduism or paganism or any of our great religious traditions, and you think about the religious teachers that are the keepers of wisdom in those traditions. I think that's what she's getting at here. And if you think about some of our scholars and philosophers and academic keepers of wisdom and tradition, and the people in our personal lives that fill that role, I think that's what this card symbolizes. You also see the adorable little bunnies on the card in contrast to the big strong bull. And I really like what she did with this card. I want to think more about it. I want to meditate more with it. I want to journal more with it. And I want to read more about it in the book that comes with the deck. But I thought it was a really interesting choice and one that really spoke to me, and I think will speak to others as well. Like I said, I don't want to show you every single card in the deck. I want to leave some surprises. The number 7 card here, which is, I believe, the Chariot, is a horse, which is the spirit of freedom. And you see the horse here looks kind of like Pegasus. And horses are other animals that I really love, and I was really glad to see a horse in this deck. The Wheel of Fortune in this deck is a spider, which is a sacred spinner, which is a very interesting and I think appropriate choice. I love absolutely every card in this deck, and so I want to show every card, but I'm resisting that temptation so that some surprises can be left if you decide that this is a deck that you want to purchase, which I absolutely would recommend. The number 12 card in tarot is the Hanged Man, and for the Hanged Man, the artist and illustrator chose, the author and illustrator chose a bat, who is the master of suspension, and I thought that was a really creative, beautiful choice. I love bats, and how interesting to depict the Hanged Man as a bat. The Death card is beautiful in this deck, and it's a moth, which is the omen of death, and the symbolism here reminds me of The Silence of the Lambs. And if you've ever seen the front of that DVD with the moth, that's what this reminds me of. Very beautiful, very thought-provoking. I absolutely love the Devil card in this deck, and the Devil here is the goat, who is the shadow god of liberation. And if you know anything about how goats are oftentimes represented in a lot of pagan symbolism, and I believe some Judeo-Christian symbolism as well, there is that association. And if you know anything about goats personally, they're very active, they're very mischievous, and I just love the expression on this goat's face. And this was one of the cards that I initially fell in love with for this deck when I saw it. Another card I really love in this deck is the Tower, which is represented as a serpent, which is the Quickener. And I thought that was a very interesting choice for the Tower. I absolutely love snakes. They're another animal that I have just always loved and been fascinated with since childhood, and that has continued for me well into adulthood. And I thought that was a really interesting, beautiful way to depict the Tower. The Sun card in this deck was another very interesting choice. and it is a rooster, which is called to awakening. And if you think of the symbolism behind roosters and their association with the sun and with morning and with rising, I thought that was a beautiful choice. I've always loved roosters. Whenever I lived in Tallahassee, Florida, when I was an undergraduate in college at Florida State University, I did my whole kitchen in a rooster theme. And I really loved the choice of the rooster for the sun in this deck. The Ace of Branches card in this deck is one of my favorites as well, and it's a snake. And I love how she has a serpent in the major arcana that is a standing for the tower and kind of represents some of the traditional, more kind of challenging mythical and religious associations and spiritual associations that we might have with the serpent. If you think about how the serpent is depicted in Genesis in the Judeo-Christian tradition, or things of that nature. But I also love how she has a serpent, she has a snake that's depicted in a much more nurturing and welcoming type guise, like you see more often in, say, the Hindu tradition, or the ancient Egyptian religious tradition, or in the Minoan tradition, or a lot of other religious and spiritual and mythological traditions that see a serpent in, I think, a much more positive light. Although you see some of that in the Judeo-Christian tradition as well. For instance, at one point in the Gospels, Christ tells his followers to be as wise as serpents. And so you have both very positive and very negative associations of snakes and serpents and dragons in all, world cultures and religions and spiritual traditions. And I really liked how she represented both in this deck, and I absolutely love this beautiful snake for the Ace of Branches. Another favorite card of mine is the Two of Branches, which is a salamander. I absolutely love salamanders. I love the fact that they are very strongly represented in the Rider-Waite-Smith tarot system. If you know anything about the suit of wands, traditionally, it's associated with fire, and salamanders are an elemental for fire. There's a lot of folklore and mythology that speaks to that in paganism and a number of other traditions. I'm absolutely crazy about axolotls, who are a type of salamander. I have a couple of stuffed axolotls. They're beautiful, fascinating creatures if you know about their ability to regenerate, and some of the cancer research and things like that they're being used in even now, if you know about their symbolism and the ancient Aztec tradition. And I really thought it was important that a salamander or a newt or an axolotl or something of that nature be included in any animal deck that I would have. And I love this card and the fact that she chose to do this. The Three of Branches is a toad. I also love frogs and toads. My father collected frogs and toads growing up for many years when I was a child, and he would have students and parents whenever he taught school that would bring them to him, and I have a big stuffed frog as well. So many beautiful cards. I'm trying not to show every single one because, again, I want there to be surprises. The Six of Branches is a hummingbird. It's an animal that is very beautiful and is very special to my mother. In particular, she feeds hummingbirds. They're, I think, one of her spirit animals in a sense, and I really like that there's a hummingbird in this deck. As I was saying, I love lizards, and it was very important to me that any deck I have contain a lizard, and the Seven of Branches card here is a beautiful lizard. I'll show you one of the court cards for the Suit of Branches, which is the Guardian, which I believe corresponds to the traditional King and Tarot, and in this deck, the Guardian of Branches is this tiger, and it's just a beautiful card. And you can see the sun symbolism right here. Very beautiful. We have this beautiful deer here for the Seven of Fossils. I like this card a lot. I also wanted to make sure that any deck I had a wolf. Wolves are very powerful animals in a lot of Native American folklore, in a lot of the Celtic and pagan traditions. And the Nine of Fossils here is this beautiful lone wolf. I absolutely love dogs. It was important to me that any deck I had contained dogs. I grew up with dogs. As a child, I always had dogs. I love other people's dogs, and I hope that I have a dog again at some point in the future. And the Tin of Fossils card in this deck is a beautiful card that features a young child playing with these two beautiful dogs and two beautiful puppies. And I absolutely love that. Brings back a lot of childhood memories and a lot of beautiful associations with our canine friends. The Seeker of Fossils card is a llama, and I absolutely love llamas. The high school drama group that I was a part of, that my father coached, was the Drama Llamas, so there's some history there, and I absolutely love this llama as the Seeker of Fossils. And let me make sure I am getting the correspondences right. The Seeker of Fossils card here corresponds to the Knight of Pentacles, which is a very down-to-earth figure, and I really love the choice to represent him with a llama. The Nurturer of Fossils in this deck is another very interesting choice that I really liked, and this Nurturer of Fossils, which corresponds with the Queen of Pentacles, is shown as a pig. And if you think about the Queen of Fossils as being very earthy, as being down-to-earth, as being interested in those things that are related to the earth, I really liked the choice to depict her with this beautiful sow. The Guardian of Fossils, which is corresponding to the King of Pentacles, like we talked about earlier in the book, is a beautiful brown bear, and I really liked this choice as well. Next we come to the Suit of Feathers, which corresponds to the Suit of Swords, carrying that air symbolism further and choosing to depict it with feathered animals and birds, which I really like. Here is the Seven of Feathers card, which is a magpie. Very beautiful. The Ten of Feathers I thought was a very evocative card. And if you know anything about how the Ten of Feathers is traditionally represented in the Rider-Waite-Smith and other tarot systems, it's a card that it symbolizes an ending. It can sometimes be seen to symbolize death or destruction or ruin. And she chose to depict this with a vulture next to an animal that has 10 feathers sticking out of its back that is prey for these vultures here. And I thought that was a very interesting and evocative choice. Our Seer of Feathers here is a parrot. Our Guardian of Feathers, which corresponds to the King of Swords in the tarot, is a bald eagle, which I really loved. I love it for its symbolism in reference to the United States. I'm an American, and that brings up a lot of very powerful symbolism for, I think, most of us that are Americans or know anything about American culture or history. So I thought that was a very important choice. The Suit of Cups is represented by shells in this deck, and here for the Two of Shells, which is like the Two of Cups card in the more traditional tarot system, where you see two people, they're coming together. It symbolizes love, it symbolizes relationships, it symbolizes friendship. It's a very happy, positive card. We have two dolphins, and if you know about anything, if you know anything about dolphins, and you know anything about them as social animals, as animals that form very strong bonds with one another, and sometimes even with humans in some cases, you'll see how appropriate this is. And it's just another example of her taking the traditional symbolism, the traditional ideas and concepts behind the tarot, and also taking what we know about animal behavior, animal biology, how animals are represented in human culture, and spirituality and religion and folklore, and meshing that together in a very seamless way. I just think this card's a great example of that, and she does it all throughout the deck. She does it in the major arcana, she does it in the numbered cards of the minor arcana, she does it in the court cards, and it's a really amazing example of it in this card. Six of Shells, or manatees. I live in Florida, so you see and hear a lot about manatees here. Very beautiful card. The Eight of Shells card is an octopus. I really am glad to see an octopus, excuse me. Octopi, I guess, is the plural. But this is a singular octopus represented in this deck. Nine of Shells is salmon. The Seer of Shells is a penguin. I love penguins. As a child, I loved Mr. Popper's Penguins, that book. I have a little stuffed penguin named Popples. I really liked seeing the penguin represented. And finally, we come to the last card we have here, which is a shark. It's the Guardian of Shells. It corresponds to the King of Cups in the more traditional tarot system. I love sharks. I thought the choice to represent the King of Cups as a shark was a very interesting and thought-provoking one, and I really like this card. There are really no cards in this deck that I dislike, and I absolutely love the card backs. I love the quality of the cardstock. I love the quality of this beautiful little book here. I love the packaging. I really cannot recommend this deck enough, and if you're in the market for an animal deck, or a deck that has nature symbolism and nature energies, I cannot recommend the Animal Wisdom Tarot enough. Again, the creator and the author is Brunke, and it is illustrated by the artist Liola. And again, thank you so much for tuning into this review. This has been Kathleen Nicole O'Neill for House of Cartomancy. If you liked this review and you found it interesting, please subscribe to my channel, follow my videos. If you would be interested in checking out my Facebook page as well, there's plenty more content where this came from. So thank you again. I'm so glad that you watched. Let me know if you have any questions or thoughts or anything you'd like to share with me in the comments. Again, this has been the Animal Wisdom Tarot from Seco Books by Brunke and Liola. And thank you so much for watching, and have a blessed day. Bye.